Catus Maximus here. This time, a little review of some 6-inch Utica 888-6. Of course, coming out of Utica, New York. Made in USA. These would be considered right-angle needle nose pliers. The length, when they talk about 6-inch, would be in relation to a straight set of pliers. Obviously, they're much shorter here because the tips have been bent over. What's more interesting is I have some old Jamestown Crescent right-angle needle nose pliers, and these are rated like 7 or 8-inch ones. And if we look at the length of between the pivot and the handles, you can see we have extra length on the handles. But if we look at the actual length of the needle nose here, we can see that the Uticas are actually a bit longer and have a bit more reach than these old Jamestown Crescents. So it's kind of interesting, the variations on sizes and measurements, that type of thing. Don't run into Utica tools all that often, but as I do, I try to post videos. Surprisingly enough, I have not posted that many videos on Utica tools. Just haven't run into that many, but I've been keeping my eye out a little bit better. We do have just a little bit of corrosion here and a little bit on the back, but I lube these up. They work pretty well. Surprisingly enough, very tight rivet, just barely any play whatsoever. And if we get a nice look at the jaws here, you can see they have a real nice, pretty deep texturing, and they are properly made. You can see there's this gap here, and what they do is they pre-grind this area. I believe it's pre-ground before they bend them, because when they do bend the steel over, it does cause the jaws to want to expand out this way a little bit. You know, if you just take a pair of needle nose pliers and you bend them over, it's going to cause some flaring in this area of the bend. So what they do is they just simply make a relief in there. That way the tips themselves will actually come together pretty tightly. We can see the tips on these are actually really, really fine, and I think they'd be pretty useful. If we even compare to the old Jamestowns, see the tips are just a little bit thicker on the Jamestowns. I think that's kind of the deal with these Crescent 7-inch ones, is that they're just a little bit, you know, heavier duty, just a little bit more meat, because they have a kind of a shorter reach, so they're just a little bit more rigid. But other than that, right-angle needle nose pliers are, of course, always handy, just because they allow you to get into tight areas, working with wire terminals, you know, all sorts of electrical situations, automotive, just a million different places where you need something like a set of needle nose pliers, but you don't have a straight reach at it. You need to be able to get around at an angle. The other thing that makes them handy is the fact that instead of being straight on, you are at this angle, so you can actually get really good eyesight. If you're trying to do some fine work, then you can really see what you're doing with the needle nose without having your hand or the handle or anything else be in the way. Of course, they have one other distinct advantage, is being right angle, you can always grab something on the side, but then you have this kind of extra grip so you can get a good pulling action. Here's a good example. I should give better examples. But one of the things, like removing these kind of wire terminals, many times the only way you can get at them is by using a pair of needle nose. But an advantage to right angle ones is that you can actually, especially the needle noses, you can get a grip just like that right at the base of the connector. So it's a real solid grip. You're not pulling on the wire, you're actually pulling on the metal of the connector. And then you can really pull it off nice and straight with a lot of control and not have to worry about bending or damaging anything. So that's why I really like these things, and I'm actually pretty stoked to have found an old pair of Uticas and to add to my very burgeoning collection of Utica tools. That just about does it. You know, I think these old Jamestown Crescents are just a bit heavier duty, just a bit more robust. They have a bit wider handles. That's one thing I will say about these Uticas, is the handles are really pretty thin, but they're a smaller set, and so it's probably just fine in most situations where you're not putting a ton of grip strength. The reason you talk about how wide the handles are is when you have real thin handles and situations where you have to put a lot of pressure on, they do kind of bite into your hand just a little bit more. Definitely pretty carefully hand ground, but we can really tell that because on this side you can see that there's this little warble here, a little indentation. And initially I thought the tips had been bent and then bent back, but if we look at the back side here, we can see that the backside is actually straight, and so this little warble here just has to do with the grinding and how it was just a little bit overground right in that little area. But it kind of gives it the nice hand-finished feel. And of all the Utica tools that I've found so far, they all really did seem to be pretty high-quality tools. It's unfortunate that they're no longer around. Anyway, really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Till next time, Catus Maximus out.